Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into some pretty choppy waters.
Yeah.
We're talking about DOGE, President-elect Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency, and its ambitious leaders, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Right.
They're aiming to shake things up
Yeah.
big time in how the federal government spends our money.
Big time.
You've sent us a stack of articles, and it's clear you want to figure out if DOGE is all bark or if it has a real bite.
It's definitely fascinating.
Yeah.
Their stated goal is a $2 trillion reduction in federal spending.
Whoa.
That kind of number isn't just trimming the fat. It's like liposuction for the whole government.
So where are they even starting with something that massive?
Yeah.
It's like trying to eat an elephant, right?
Well, they've been pretty vocal about a few key areas.
Okay.
One that's gotten a lot of attention is the IRS and the complexity of the tax code. They're talking about simplifying the whole system.
I mean, most people would probably agree taxes are complicated, but is that really such a big deal?
Actually, it is. The U.S. tax code has ballooned to over 16 million words.
Wow.
Back in 1955, it was less than 1.5 million.
Really?
Think about all the time and resources that go into navigating that mess.
Yeah.
Americans spend a collective 6.5 billion hours every year just trying to figure out their taxes.
6.5 billion hours.
Yeah.
That's insane. So are they saying all that complexity is actually costing the government money?
Yes, they argue that this complexity leads to inefficiencies in both compliance and enforcement.
Okay.
It makes it harder for people to file their taxes correctly, which can lead to errors and delays.
Right.
It also makes it more difficult for the IRS to audit returns and collect taxes owed.
Uh-huh.
Simplifying the tax code, they say, would save time, money, and headaches for everyone involved.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Less complexity, smoother process, potentially fewer errors.
Right.
What else are they targeting?
Well, this is where things get a bit more explosive.
Okay.
They've publicly called out both the Department of Defense and the Department of Education for failing their audits.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah,
Failed their audits. That sounds serious.
it is.
What does that even mean in this context?
It means they haven't been able to provide a clear and complete accounting of how they spent billions of taxpayer dollars.
Oh, wow.
DOGE sees this as a huge red flag for potential mismanagement and waste.
So it's not just that they spent too much, it's that they can't even show where the money went.
That's right.
Hmm.
It raises serious questions about transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
DOGE is basically saying, if you can't tell us where the money went, we're going to find out, and we're going to make some changes.
Okay, so we've got taxes and these failed audits. Is there a pattern emerging here?
Yeah.
Are they going after any other specific departments?
Not necessarily specific departments, but they are taking aim at another big target: expired programs.
Okay.
They claim there's $516 billion allocated to programs that are, on paper at least, no longer active.
What?
Some haven't been active for over a decade.
Wait, so the government is still funding programs that don't even exist anymore? How does that even happen?
It's a classic example of bureaucratic inertia.
Okay.
Programs get created, funding gets allocated, and then even when the program ends, the funding stream sometimes keeps flowing.
Wow.
DOGE argues that this is a symptom of a larger problem:
Yeah.
a lack of oversight and accountability in how the government spends money.
Okay, so they're looking at how money is spent at the agency level,
Right.
but also these broader systemic issues.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
They're casting a wide net, looking for inefficiencies wherever they can find them.
Wow.
And here's another area where they're planning to shake things up: the federal workforce, specifically the work-from-home trend that's become so common.
Really? So no more Zoom meetings for government employees?
That's the idea. DOGE argues that a majority of federal workers aren't showing up to the office regularly, and that the government owns a lot of empty office buildings.
Okay.
They see this as a massive waste of resources.
I can see their point. Empty buildings cost money to maintain, even if nobody's using them.
Right.
But what about the argument that work from home can actually boost productivity?
They're not buying it.
Mm-hmm.
They even cited a report that claims only 1% of government workers, excluding security and maintenance personnel, are actually working 40 hours a week in person.
1%?
Yeah,
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim.
it is.
I wonder if there are other studies that back that up.
Right.
But, okay, so targeting wasteful spending, lack of accountability, and a perceived culture of low productivity. It sounds like they're aiming for a pretty significant shift in how the government operates.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched on their plans for deregulation, technology modernization, and tackling specific spending they find questionable. Like a lot to unpack.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
So listeners, it's clear DOGE is setting some pretty ambitious goals, but are they realistic? And what will the impact be if they actually try to implement all of this? We'll dive into those questions in part 2 of this deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
Stay with us. Okay,
Yes.
so we've laid out some of DOGE's big targets, but you know what they say? Breaking things is easier than fixing them.
Right.
Expert speaker. Let's talk about the potential consequences of DOGE actually succeeding, because a lot of this stuff could have some pretty big ripple effects.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We've got to look beyond the surface here.
Right.
Let's start with the federal workforce.
Okay.
If DOGE is serious about cutting those $2 trillion and bringing everyone back to the office,
Uh-huh.
it's hard to imagine that not resulting in job losses.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You can't really streamline and downsize without some people ending up without a job, can you?
It's unlikely.
Yeah.
And while DOGE argues a lot of those jobs are unnecessary, these are real people we're talking about.
Right.
People with families, mortgages, lives that are built around those jobs.
Yeah.
The transition, even if it's to a more efficient government, is going to be rough for a lot of folks.
I imagine there's also a geographical element to that.
Yeah.
Aren't some towns and even whole regions pretty dependent on federal jobs? What happens to those communities?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it's something DOGE will have to address.
Right.
If they're not careful, these cuts could disproportionately impact certain areas,
Right.
leading to economic hardship and even potentially, ghost towns in extreme cases.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so job losses are a definite concern.
Yeah.
What about the impact on actual government services? I mean, if they're slashing budgets and cutting staff, is that going to mean longer wait times, more errors, things like that?
It's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
Critics are already saying that DOGE's laser focus on efficiency could lead to cuts in essential services, or at least a decline in their quality.
Right.
Imagine things like processing visa applications or disability claims.
Mm.
If you rush those processes to save time and money, mistakes are bound to happen.
So it's that classic trade-off,
Yeah.
speed versus accuracy.
Exactly.
Right.
And in a lot of these cases, accuracy is really important. We're talking about things that have a huge impact on people's lives.
All right, so potential job losses, impact on services. What else should we be thinking about?
Well, we've got to talk about deregulation.
Okay.
DOGE has made it very clear they want to cut red tape, especially in areas like construction where they argue it's holding back the economy.
Yeah, they're saying those regulations slow things down and make projects more expensive.
Right.
But on the flip side, those regulations are often in place to protect the environment and worker safety.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's the big question here.
Yeah.
Can they streamline these processes without creating unintended negative consequences?
Right.
Because rolling back environmental protections could have long-term costs that outweigh any short-term economic gains.
Right.
And compromising worker safety is obviously a huge ethical concern.
It's a tough balance.
It is.
You want things to move faster and be more efficient, but not at the expense of safety or the environment.
Right.
Right.
And it's not just about finding that balance.
Yeah.
It's about proving to the public that they're doing it responsibly.
Right.
DOGE will need to be incredibly transparent about how they're making these decisions and what safeguards are in place to prevent those negative outcomes.
Transparency and trust.
Absolutely.
Those seem to be recurring things here.
Yeah.
So we've talked about potential job losses, impact on services, and the risks of deregulation.
Uh-huh.
Anything else we need to consider?
Well, let's not forget their plans to modernize all those outdated IT systems.
Right. They were talking about how 80% of the IT budget is going to just maintaining those old systems.
Right.
Systems that are, by the way, incredibly vulnerable to hackers.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So modernizing is a good idea in theory.
Right.
It could lead to more secure, efficient systems in the long run.
Uh-huh.
But the transition itself is risky and expensive.
Yeah.
You're essentially ripping out the guts of the government's digital infrastructure and trying to replace them with something new.
And if they mess that up.
It could be a disaster. Imagine government websites crashing, data breaches, agencies unable to function.
Oh, wow.
It's a huge undertaking, and it's one where they absolutely cannot afford to cut corners.
It seems like there's a lot of potential for things to go wrong with DOGE's plans.
Right.
A lot of downsides.
Yeah.
Is there anything positive to say here? Any reason for optimism?
Well, there is a general consensus that the government could be more efficient.
Okay.
I don't think anyone would disagree with that.
Right.
And there's certainly a lot of waste that could be eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
If DOGE can deliver on even a fraction of their promises, That could free up resources for other priorities.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
I don't think so.
It's more like cautious optimism.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But remember, even if they achieve these cuts and streamline things, the big question remains, what do they do with all that extra money?
Right.
Do they cut taxes, pay down debt, invest in new programs? That's a whole other battleground.
All right, listeners, we've just explored some of the potential downsides of DOG's ambitious plans. But the story isn't over yet.
Nope.
In part 3 of this deep dive, we'll take a look at the political battles that are already brewing and consider what true success might look like for this new department.
It'll be interesting to see.
Don't go anywhere. All right, we've talked about DOGE's goals and the potential impact.
Right.
Both good and bad.
Yeah.
But let's be real, none of this is happening in a vacuum.
Yep.
There are going to be some serious political battles over all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is Washington we're talking about.
Right.
Anytime you start talking about cutting spending and shaking up the status quo,
yeah,
you're going to run into some serious resistance.
So where do you see the biggest pushback coming from?
Well, first and foremost, from the agencies themselves.
Okay.
They're not going to just sit back and watch their budgets get slashed and their power diminish.
Right.
They're going to fight tooth and nail to protect their turf. And they've got allies in Congress who will back them up.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
They've got a lot to lose. But isn't there also a philosophical element to this? I mean, some people just fundamentally disagree with the idea of smaller government, right?
You're right.
Yeah.
You've got groups on the left who are concerned about potential cuts to social programs and environmental regulations.
Okay.
They're going to argue that DOG's approach is too focused on cost cutting and not enough on the needs of vulnerable populations.
And then on the other side, you've got folks who think any government intervention is bad,
right,
even if it's aimed at reducing waste.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're going to be suspicious of DOG's motives and skeptical that any government agency can truly be efficient. They'll likely argue that the best way to reduce waste is to simply shrink the size of government overall.
So DOGE is kind of stuck in the middle of this ideological tug of war.
They are.
What about the public? How are they reacting to all of this?
It's a mixed bag.
Okay.
Polls show that there's definitely some appetite for making government more efficient and accountable.
Yeah.
People are tired of seeing their tax dollars wasted. But there's also a lot of uncertainty and anxiety about what these changes will mean in practice.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say you're going to cut waste, but it's another thing entirely when those cuts start affecting real people's lives.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the challenge for DOGE.
Yeah.
They need to convince the public that they can achieve these ambitious goals without causing too much disruption or harm.
So let's say they manage to navigate all of these political and public relations hurdles. What would success actually look like for DOGE? How will we know if they've made a real difference?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
For me, there are a few key indicators to watch for.
Okay.
First, tangible results.
Okay.
They need to show actual cost savings and improvements in efficiency.
Right.
It's not enough to just talk about cutting waste. They need to prove that they've actually done it.
So hard numbers, not just rhetoric.
Precisely.
Okay.
Second, they need to achieve those results without compromising the quality of essential government services. It's a delicate balancing act, but they need to show that they can do more with less without sacrificing effectiveness.
And that ties back into what we were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
The potential impact on services, the risk of errors, all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And finally, transparency is crucial.
Okay.
They need to be open and honest about their methods, their decisions, and the results they're achieving.
Right.
If they can build trust with the public and demonstrate that they're acting in the best interest of the country, they might just have a chance to pull this off.
Well, expert speaker, you've given us a lot to think about today.
It's been an interesting deep dive.
It has.
Yeah.
Listener, we've taken a deep dive into DOGE, exploring their ambitious plans, the potential benefits and risks, and the political challenges they face. It's clear that the road ahead for DOGE is going to be bumpy, to say the least.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
There are a lot of unknowns, a lot of potential pitfalls.
Right.
But there's also the possibility for real, meaningful change.
And ultimately, that's what we'll be watching for.
Exactly.
Will DOGE be able to deliver on its promises? Will they be able to make government more efficient and accountable without causing undue harm? Only time will tell.
We'll have to wait and see.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll keep you updated as this story unfolds.